Toddler found a German shepherd crying under the fairground stage. The ending left all in tears. What happens when the impossible becomes reality? A tiny voice and a pure heart turn the impossible into a beautiful miracle. This story is one of survival, love, and an unbreakable connection. Like, share, and subscribe. You won't want to miss the magic of this journey. The fairground looked different when the music stopped. A day ago it had been alive with lights, laughter, and the jingling of rides. Now the Ferris wheel stood still against the sky, its colors faded in the quiet afternoon. Candy wrappers stuck to the grass like forgotten confetti, and a few balloons, half deflated, rolled lazily with the breeze. It was the kind of silence that comes after joy has packed up and gone home. Through this empty world ran a little girl in a blue dress. Her shoes tapped softly on the wooden planks as she skipped past the shuttered food stalls and empty game booths. In her hand, she carried nothing but a small ribbon she had found near the popcorn stand. She twirled with it, laughing, chasing it like it was the tail of a kite. For her, the fairground wasn't finished. It was just another place to play. She darted toward the stage, the one where clowns had danced and musicians had played the night before. Its wooden boards creaked under her steps, still smelling faintly of spilled lemonade and fried food. She crouched to touch a shiny candy wrapper, giggling at the way it stuck to her fingers. But just as she bent to peel it off, she froze. A sound slipped through the stillness. Not the wind, not the creak of old boards. Softer, sharper, a whimper. Her head tilted, her ribbon falling to the ground. She pressed her ear closer to the stage. Again, the sound came, faint, trembling, as if something hidden beneath the boards was crying for help. Her small chest rose and fell faster, not with fear but with curiosity. She dropped to her knees and placed both palms on the wood, listening hard. The cries weren't echoes of machines cooling after a long night. They were alive. The boards shivered faintly under her ear as the sound grew clearer, the low, broken whimper of an animal. The girl lowered herself until her cheek brushed the dusty floor. Between the gaps in the stage, a pair of eyes stared back at her. They glowed faintly in the shadows, wide and full of fear. Her breath caught. It was a dog, a German shepherd. His body was hidden in the dark, but the sound of his breathing told a story of exhaustion. Each whimper carried pain, loneliness, and something more, pleading. He was trapped beneath the fairground stage, a place that had echoed with joy the night before, now holding a secret no one else had noticed. The toddler's lips parted. She whispered softly as if words could reach through the wood. "Doggy!" The shepherd's ear twitched at her voice. He gave one more low cry, barely strong enough to rise above the silence. The girl leaned closer, her eyes wide, her little heart beating fast. What was he doing there? Why had no one heard him in all the noise of the carnival? The fairground lay empty, the town quiet. Only she had listened. And in that moment, a story began, one that would carry a whole community from heartbreak to healing, and leave everyone who heard it in tears. Morning came slow to the fairground, the way it often does to places that have just finished being loud. The Ferris wheel stood still like a giant coin pressed against the pale sky. Its cars hung quiet, each one a tiny room where laughter had lived the night before. The carousel was wrapped with a tired tarp, horses frozen mid-gallop, their painted eyes dulled by dust. Paper cups lay on their sides near the popcorn stall, and candy wrappers clung to the damp grass like small flags from a party that had kept its own secrets. The smell of fried dough and sweet syrup lingered in the air, soft and stubborn, as if the night didn't want to let go. When the carnival was in town, this place had been a river of sound, bells, music, shouts over games, and the thrill that rises from a crowd as one voice. It had been like that every year for as long as anyone could remember. Parents told stories that started with, "When I was your age," and ended under these same bright bulbs. Dates were made here, and promises too, some kept and some not. Every season, the fairground came alive, and then, just as surely, it slept. The trucks rolled away. The lights were switched off. What was left behind was a stillness almost as loud as what came before. Not far from the fairground, in a small house with a porch that faced the fence, lived a grandmother and her granddaughter. The little girl wore a blue dress most days because it twirled well and made her laugh when it floated. Their routine was simple: breakfast at the table by the window, a little dance to a song on the radio, and then a slow walk along the fence that separated their yard from the wide, empty field. The grandmother kept a careful eye on the ground where boards lifted and nails poked, and she taught the girl to point out ouch places with her finger instead of her feet. To the toddler, the fairground was a magic place even without noise. She didn't need the rides to move to love them. She pressed her small hands to the Ferris wheel's gate and looked up, mouth open, as if the sky might answer back. She hunted for shiny things on the ground: a stray button, a foil bit of balloon, a plastic ring that surely must have slipped from a clown's pocket. The grandmother let her collect these treasures in a jar at home. For remembering, she said, though the child remembered just fine without the jar. The wooden stage at the far end of the field was where the music had been. It didn't look like much now. A few strands of light sagged over it, some bulbs broken, others filled with tiny bits of moth and dust. A banner from last night still drooped from one nail, the painted letters already curling at the edges. The boards of the stage were old, the kind that talk when you walk on them, groans and sighs and small pops as the wood shifts to meet your weight. The grandmother always paused before they went near it. "We don't go under there," she said gently, not to scare the child, but to mark a line. "We listen to the wood and we keep our feet where it's strong." They made a little game of it. The girl would stomp once and giggle at the echo. The grandmother would stomp back, and they would both say, "creak," at the same time. Then they would sit on the lowest step and share a slice of apple, watching a line of ants find the dried sugar on a dropped stick of cotton candy. The world was quiet here, but it wasn't empty. It was full of small things, the kind that make up a day: wind that smells like sugar even after the stall has shut, a gull that thinks any wrapper might be food, a scrap of music sung without a voice. After lunch, the sun slid across the field at a lazy pace. The Ferris wheel cast long spokes of shadow that moved inch by inch across the grass. Somewhere a door clapped and a dog barked twice and then decided there was nothing more to say. The girl carried her ribbon, the one she had found by the popcorn stand, pinched between thumb and finger, holding it up to the light. It flashed like fish in a stream, and she chased its little shine across the boards of the stage. Up close, the stage told other stories. The smell of spilled lemonade had soaked into the wood and turned sour around the edges. A strip of tape, once used to hold down a wire, lifted and curled, catching on the girl's shoe. The grandmother bent to peel it free with careful fingers. "Thank you," she said to the stage, as if it had moved to help. The girl copied her, whispering, "Thank you," to the boards, and patted them with her palm. The lights overhead were quiet, but not all dead. One bulb held a stubborn filament that refused to give up, and sometimes, when a cloud moved, a faint kiss of light winked in the glass and was gone. The girl saw it and clapped, thinking she had made it happen, and the grandmother laughed softly at the kind of magic that only children can call on without trying. In the stillness, other sounds grew large. A loose sign banged somewhere slow and steady, the way a heart does when you've run just a little. Far away, a truck downshifted and grumbled and then fell silent. A paper plate skittered under the bleachers and caught on a nail with a whisper. The boards beneath their feet settled, gave a small crack, and then held. Nothing about the place felt dangerous if you kept to the rules. It felt like a big animal at rest, watching through half-closed eyes. The girl made a path along the edge of the stage, counting her steps in a way that did not need numbers. 1, 2, 3, to the post with the fading star sticker on it. 4, 5, 6, to the spot where the banner's corner flapped and tickled her ankle. She crouched to touch a candy wrapper, smooth and silver, and it stuck to her finger with a soft pull. She giggled because sticky things are funny when you are small. Then she paused. It wasn't the wrapper that made her stop. It was a noise that did not fit the list her ears had made. Very faint. Not the wind's thumb along the edge of the banner. Not the soft drum of something rolling on the boards. A sound that carried a feeling with it, thin and sad, and shaped like a question. She straightened, head tilted, ribbon falling to the wood without a sound. The grandmother, still near the step, looked up at her face right away. "What did you hear?" she asked, not with worry, just with attention. The child didn't answer at first. She took 2 tiny steps along the board, placed her ear closer to a gap where 2 planks didn't meet just right, and listened hard. The smell of old grease and dust rose to meet her. There was again a soft whimper, the kind of sound a hurt thing makes when it's trying not to be heard. It slid through the dark under the stage like a thread. The girl's mouth made a small circle. She pressed her palm to the wood and felt the faintest tremble under it, as if the sound had a body that touched the world. She looked back at her grandmother with eyes that had gotten a shade more serious than they were a minute ago. "Here," she said, because that word was enough to carry the rest when she was this small. The grandmother joined her, kneeling with a quiet groan that only bones make. She put her ear to the same seam. At first there was only their own breath, quick and warm. Then, in the hush that comes when 2 people try to be the same kind of quiet, the sound rose again, thin and testing, a whine that had almost given up on being answered. The girl leaned farther, cheek to the dusty floor, and peered into the slice of darkness between boards. The light under there was strange, too shallow to see far, too deep to be empty. For a moment it looked like nothing at all. Then a blink flashed back at her, 2 reflected pinpricks that were gone as quick as a wink. She didn't know yet what the eyes belonged to. She only knew they were alive, and they were asking. The fairground held its breath. The broken bulbs above them caught a bit of sun and did nothing with it. Somewhere, a gull laughed at its own joke. The ribbon lay still by the girl's knee. Under the stage, where the day did not reach, something shifted and let out the softest cry, as if to apologize for needing anything. The grandmother's hand found the child's shoulder and rested there, warm and steady. The girl did not pull away. She bent closer to the seam, the boards rough against her skin, and listened again, her blue dress pooled around her like a small patch of sky fallen to earth. She knew the rule. Her grandmother had said it every day they walked past the stage. "We don't crawl under there. We keep our feet where the wood is strong." The words were gentle, not heavy, and they usually felt easy to follow. But the sound coming from beneath the boards wasn't a usual sound. It was small and hurting, like a thread pulling at her sleeve. It asked her to come closer, not to break rules, but to understand. She kept one hand on the edge of the stage and shuffled forward on her knees. Her blue dress brushed the dusty boards, picking up flecks that clung like stars. The stage loomed above her, a giant in sleep, its sagging strands of bulbs like a crown gone crooked. Up there, last night's music had stomped and twirled. Down here, the space was low and dark and smelled like old spills and damp wood. The difference made her feel smaller and braver at the same time. "Stay where I can see you," her grandmother said, voice steady. The girl nodded without turning. She wasn't going under. She promised herself that. She just needed the sound to be true or not true, and there was only one way to learn which it was. She lay on her stomach and pressed her ear to a seam between the boards. The wood was cool and a little rough, and it creaked softly as if surprised to be held like that. For a moment, all she heard was her own breathing and the small thud of her heart. Then the fairground's bigger silences stepped aside, and the hidden sound came clear. A low whimper, the kind a hurt thing makes when it's trying not to cry loud. It rose and fell as if it belonged to breath. It trembled as if it belonged to fear. Her fingers found the edge of the plank and held on. She knew dogs barked. She knew cats meowed. This sound was neither and both, not a word but a feeling. She lifted her cheek just enough to see through the narrow gap. At first there was only shadow, layered and deep. Dust drifted in slow sparkles where a thin line of light snuck under the stage skirting. She waited, eyes watering from the wooden smell, and the darkness arranged itself into almost shapes, beams, a fallen cup, a torn strand of banner that had fallen through a crack sometime during the noise of last night. And then, like a blink answering a blink, 2 points of shine appeared. They moved with breath. They watched. Her own breath caught. The points weren't lights at all. They were eyes, wide, reflective, trying to see her as much as she tried to see them. She didn't pull back. She blinked once, slow, the way she had seen calm people blink at skittish animals. The eyes held. "Doggy," she whispered. The words slid easily into the seam, small enough to fit. Her voice made a tiny puff of dust rise, and in that dust the eyes flickered. A soft cry came back, hardly more than a hum. It meant, "I'm here." It also meant, "I am not okay." Fear prickled up her arms. It wasn't the big kind of fear that makes you run. It was the careful kind that makes you move like you're holding something breakable. She could feel her grandmother's nearness behind her, a warm shape at the edge of her courage. The girl lifted one hand and spread her fingers flat on the board as if to show they were empty. "It's okay," she breathed. "I see you." The eyes shifted. She glimpsed more. A slant of muzzle, the line of a cheek, the suggestion of a big ear flattened back. The space was too tight for him to sit up. He seemed tucked into a pocket of darkness shaped by old beams. When he inhaled, dust lifted and fell. When he exhaled, the sound caught, like a thread snagging on a nail. The scent that rose to her wasn't just wood and old sugar. It carried the sour note of wet fur dried without warmth, and something metallic underneath, maybe a scrape, maybe a cut. "Sweetheart?" her grandmother asked, close now, her hand resting lightly between the girl's shoulder blades. "What do you see?" "Eyes," the child whispered. "He's under. He's crying." The hand on her back steadied. "All right," the grandmother said softly. "We'll be careful." She didn't say move away yet. She watched the small body lying flat, the small head tucked low, the fine line between brave and too much. The girl put her lips near the seam again, so near her words could roll straight down. "Hi," she said, as if greeting a friend hiding in a game. "Hi, doggy." The eyes blinked, a slow, tired blink, and the faintest lift of breath answered her. She heard herself breathe out and tried to make the breath sound like safety. She thought about what makes her feel safe: a blanket, a nightlight, a hand. She couldn't give a blanket through a floor. She couldn't turn on a light inside a shadow. But she had a hand, and she had a voice. She kept both soft. "It's okay," she repeated, the syllables cradled in her mouth. "I'm here." The German shepherd, she could see that now in the angle of his face, the weight of his look, did not growl. He didn't have growl left. He held himself as still as he could, like someone who has learned that moving brings pain. When he shifted, something under him ticked against wood. A bottle cap, a tack, something small and hard in the wrong place. His ears twitched at every faraway sound. The gull on the concession roof, the flap of the banner, the grandmother's breath, but always returned to the seam where the child waited. Her fear softened into something else, something stronger. Compassion moved in like warm tea into a cold cup. It filled the empty places fear had left behind. "Hurts?" she asked, not sure if he could know what she meant. She touched the board with her fingertip in the smallest circle, a touch to say stay without any command in it. His answer was a low, almost silent sound. It wasn't a yes, it wasn't a no. It was the kind of sound that says I am trying. The stage creaked as a breeze shifted its weight. The broken bulbs above them knocked gently together, glass clicking like soft chimes. The girl flinched at the noise and then calmed herself with a long, careful breath. "Shoo," she said, not to the dog, but to the creaks, to the parts of the world that didn't know how to be quiet when quiet was needed. She pushed her cheek closer to the seam, so close the dust tickled her lashes. Now that her eyes had adjusted, she caught more details. A dark paw tucked under a heavy chest, a patch of fur clumped wrong, as if dried by sticky hands, a thin quiver at the flank each time he breathed. He was big, but the space had made him small. The wrongness of it turned in her, not as anger. She didn't know anger, but as a simple, strong no. A dog didn't belong under a stage with old nails and old spills. He belonged where small hands could reach him and say good. Her grandmother knelt beside her and angled her head to see. The older woman's breath paused for a second, then steadied. She could read more than the girl could. The hollowness of the dog's sides, the careful way he held one hind leg, the quiet way he kept his mouth closed to save the little moisture he had. She tucked that knowing behind her eyes where it wouldn't scare the child. "You found him," she whispered. "Good ears." The compliment warmed the girl as if someone had put a shawl around her. She smiled without meaning to, the smile small and serious. "I hear," she said, then turned back to the seam. "We see you," she told the dog. "We won't leave." He blinked again, slower now, as if her words weighed enough to lean against. The whimper thinned and paused, then returned, still soft, still asking. The girl felt the question in it. She didn't have all the answers, but she had a beginning. "We get help," she promised, the P in help puffing dust like a tiny cloud. "Okay." His ears tilted at the shape of the word. For a breath, the whole fairground seemed to balance on that seam. The rides, the empty booths, the broken bulbs, the bench where last night a teenager had laughed with a mouthful of cotton candy. Everything waited to see what a single small child would do next. She didn't move right away. She stayed there long enough to make sure the eyes stayed with her, long enough to lay one more soft line of words for him to hold. "Good dog. We're here." Then she slid her cheek from the board and blinked the dust out of her lashes. Her grandmother's hand found hers and closed, warm and sure. The stage groaned once, a tired, harmless sound. The broken lights above them caught a change in the sun and flashed a weak, brave spark. The girl picked up her fallen ribbon and tucked it into the pocket of her blue dress, as if tucking in courage. She pressed her palm to the board one last time, a quiet promise, and felt, faintly, a breath answer from the dark. She stood. The world felt bigger when she was not lying down, but it did not feel too big. She kept her eyes on the seam, then on the steps, then on the open path that led toward neighbors and tools and voices that could lift boards and bring water and make soft places out of hard ones. Behind her, the whimper rose and faded. In front of her, the fairground waited, empty enough to carry a child's shout all the way to a door and back again. The little girl gathered her breath in her chest and held it like a gift she would have to throw far. "Ready?" her grandmother asked. The child nodded, solemn and bright. "Ready," she said. And because fear and compassion can live in the same small body and make it strong, she took the first step toward help, leaving behind, for only a moment, the pair of eyes in the dark that had trusted her to hear. The girl didn't run at first. She looked back through the seam one more time, making sure the eyes were still there, that the faint sound hadn't been something the boards made by mistake. The whimper answered her like a thread tugging at her sleeve. That was enough. She stood, clutched her ribbon in a dusty fist, and hurried down the steps. "Grandma," she called, even though her grandmother was only a few paces away. Saying the name out loud made the world feel steadier. "I heard him," the girl said, breath coming quick. "He's under." The grandmother held her gaze for a beat, reading the seriousness in a face that was usually all light. She nodded once, then lifted her head and raised her voice, the way people do when they need help now. "Tom, Mary," she called toward the houses beyond the fence. "Anyone nearby, at the stage." Her voice carried clean across the empty field, bounced off the still Ferris wheel, and slid into the alleys behind the main street. A door banged open. A figure appeared on a porch, then another. "What's wrong?" someone shouted. "Dog trapped," the grandmother answered. "Under the stage." She didn't have to say more. In a town that has shared winters and storms, the words were enough to set feet moving. A man jogged across the grass with a toolbox banging against his thigh. A woman pulled a coil of rope from the back of a pickup and slung it over her shoulder. A teenager snatched a flashlight from his kitchen drawer and followed, laces flapping. The little girl kept one hand on the grandmother's skirt and the other pressed to her own chest as if to keep her courage from spilling. They gathered in a loose ring around the stage, the old boards creaking under the new weight of attention. The first flashlight beam cut under the edge and caught dust in a cone of white. Motes danced like tiny sparks in a place where last night there had been lights of a different kind. "Where?" Tom asked, already crouching. The girl pointed to the seam where her cheek had been. "There," she said, and the word made the distance between fear and action very short. He slid onto his stomach, pressed his ear to the boards, and listened. After a few breaths he nodded, face tightening. "I hear him." The beam of his flashlight moved slow and careful, searching past crosspieces and fallen trash. "Big one," he murmured. "Shepherd looks like he's tucked tight." A low sound reached them then, not the thin whimper they had first heard, but a rough growl. It wasn't a threat. It was a warning made of fear and duty both. "I'm here. Don't hurt me. Don't come too fast." "Easy, boy," Tom said softly toward the crack, "the way you speak to any creature cornered by more than wood." The growl rose and fell, the edges ragged. The teenager with the flashlight swallowed. "I thought I heard something last night," he said, voice small in the big quiet. "I figured it was the generator cooling." "Me too," a woman admitted, wrapping a rope around her forearm as if she could wind guilt onto it and carry it away. During the music, little cries. I told myself they were part of a song. Heads dipped. No one scolded. The truth was enough. Mary, who ran the hardware store and knew how things were put together and taken apart, slid a pry bar from Tom's toolbox. "We'll lift one board first," she said. "Slow. If he panics, we stop." Tom nodded. "We don't reach and bear," he added. "We let him see hands mean help." They set to it with a rhythm that felt like prayer. Wedge, brace, lift, pause. Wedge, brace, lift, pause. Each squeal of a loosened nail made the shepherd's growl tremble. Each time it trembled, the girl whispered, "It's okay," from the step where the grandmother kept her with a gentle arm. The whisper didn't travel far, but the dog's ears flicked toward it, and that was enough for everyone to keep going. The first board came free with a moan and a crack. Dust rose in a gray breath and settled on hair and shoulders. A wider line of light fell under the stage, and the first faces leaned close. The flashlight beams crossed like quiet swords and found him. A German shepherd wedged between beam and dirt, ribs like ladder rungs, fur clotted with splinters and dried spills. One hind leg was caught in a snarl of old wire, twisted tight around the ankle where paw meets leg. A torn banner had looped around his belly as if trying to pull him deeper. His head lay low, eyes too big for his thin face, flicking from light to shadow and back to the seam where the child sat. "Lord," someone breathed. "He's a bag of bones." The vet, called by a neighbor as soon as the first shout had gone up, knelt with a steady look and a bag at her side. "Don't rush him," she said. "Let him see us. We talk before we touch." Her voice slid under the stage like warm water. "Hey, friend," she called. "We've got you. No more loud now. Just us." They loosened the second board. The stage answered with a tired groan, and the shepherd's growl scratched up again, thinner now, protective as a shield made of tin. The teenager's beam found the wire at the hind leg and held on it. "There?" he said, jaw tight. "Fence scrap. Must have fallen through from behind." Tom nodded. "Snips." Mary handed them over. "Wait," the vet said, her palm raised but gentle. "He's ready to bite anything that moves near that leg. Let me talk to him a second longer." They paused and listened with her. The vet spoke the way you speak to babies and hurt things. "You've been brave a long time," she murmured. "Let's trade you some of that weight." The shepherd's chest rose and fell in short strokes. The girl, unable to keep still, slid a hand into her pocket and found the small crust of bread she'd saved from breakfast. She looked up at her grandmother, and the older woman understood without words. "Stay where you are," she whispered. "Offer it from there." The child lay flat on the step again, not under the stage, but close enough that her voice could find the dog's ears. She held the bread to the seam. "For you," she said. "It's safe." The German shepherd lifted his head an inch toward the smell. His ears twitched. The growl flickered out between one breath and the next and turned into a whine that sounded like an apology and a hope at once. He stretched his nose as far as the wire and the banner allowed. The crust sat just beyond reach. The little girl didn't push it closer. She knew better without knowing how she knew. Instead, she kept her hands still and her voice soft. "Good boy," she breathed. "We're here." "Now," the vet said, nodding to Tom. "Snips." Tom flattened himself and slid the cutter under the stage, hands steady, movements small. The wire bit his knuckles and came away with a metallic cry. The dog flinched, then stilled, eyes never leaving the seam where the child waited. Mary eased the torn banner up and over his back and out, slow, like unwinding a story that had gone wrong. The snarl fell away from the leg. Blood didn't surge. It oozed, tired and dark. The vet pressed a clean pad through the gap with 2 fingers. "Hold," she told Tom, and he did. With the wire off, there was still the matter of getting him out. The space was too tight for turning, too low for standing fully. "We lift 2 more boards," Mary said. "Wide enough for shoulders." "And a blanket under him," the vet added. "Once he's free to move, he'll try to bolt. Hurt animals run toward away." The grandmother glanced at the child. "We'll keep her here," she said, and the little girl nodded, understanding that sometimes staying is its own kind of help. They levered 2 more boards, the nails shrieking as if scolded for sleeping on the job. Light poured into a space that hadn't seen it since the stage was built. The shepherd blinked hard against it. He tried to push himself up and failed. His front legs trembled and folded. The vet slid a folded blanket through the gap and tucked it under his chest with her fingertips. "On my count," she said to Tom and Mary. "We don't pull him by a limb. We cradle him." The men on either side set their hands where she pointed, under ribs, under haunches, palm on the skull, only to guide, not to hold. 1, 2, 3. They lifted. The dog made a sound that wasn't a cry and wasn't a growl, something rough that came from a place deeper than either. His body slid forward in inches. The boards scraped his hip. He shuddered, more from fear than pain. "Easy," the vet breathed. "Easy, easy." The girl's voice braided with hers. "It's okay." The word moved like a rope thrown from a boat to a swimmer. The shepherd's eyes found the blue dress through the seam and held fast. He came out like a secret finally told, slowly at first, and then all at once. The front half cleared the edge, then the shoulders, then the narrow waist where the banner had cinched him. His hind leg, freed from the wire, dragged and then tripped over the lip of the frame. Tom shifted his grip and kept the limb from knocking the wood. In one more careful motion, the dog slid onto the blanket and into the afternoon, blinking at the change from shadow to day. For a heartbeat nobody moved. They saw him fully now, thin as a bad memory, coat matted with dust and tiny splinters, a raw groove around his ankle where the wire had bitten, old scabs along his ribs that spoke of nights without shelter. He smelled like old spills and fear, but his eyes, milk glass bright with pain, were clear enough to find the little girl on the step. He licked once at the air in front of her, a tired echo of gratitude. People let out the breaths they had been holding. The teenager's hand shook, the flashlight's beam jittered and then steadied. Mary wiped her face with her sleeve and left a clean line through the dust. Someone behind them whispered, "I heard him during the parade and told myself it was a squeaky wheel." The vet nodded once without looking up. "We heard now," she said. "We're hearing." "Blanket lift," she added, and the men obeyed, turning the cloth into a sling. The shepherd didn't fight. He collapsed into their hold as if his body had been waiting for permission to rest. The grandmother felt the child lean toward him and kept a soft hand at her back, guiding without denying. "You did good," she whispered into the small ear. "You did so good." As they carried the dog off the boards and onto the grass, the stage let out one final creak as if relieved to be rid of its secret. The broken bulbs above them knocked together, and the sound was almost like applause. The fairground's wide quiet filled in around the circle of people, but it felt different now, not hollow, not ignoring. The town had noticed. The town had answered. And on a sunlit patch of grass next to the old wooden stage, a German shepherd lay at last where hands could reach him, his breaths shallow but sure, his eyes fixed on the blue dress that had heard him first. For a long breath after the first boards came up, everyone stayed very still. The shepherd lay half in shadow, half in light, ribs moving like a thin bellows. When Tom slid the blanket a little closer, the dog's head jerked. Fear flashed through him like a spark through dry straw. He surged an inch backward, nails scraping wood, and the growl came back, raw, warning, all instinct. The rope a neighbor had looped as a guide hissed along the plank, and the shepherd snapped at it, teeth clacking on empty air. He wasn't trying to hurt anyone. He was trying not to be taken by anything again. "Stop," the vet said softly, one palm lifted. "Everyone breathe." The ring of people obeyed. The teenager clicked his flashlight off so the beam wouldn't stab the dog's eyes. The grandmother shifted her arm around the child, not to pull her away, but to make a safe circle she could lean into. Dust hung in the bright slice of afternoon, turning the air to powder. "Fear is loud right now," the vet murmured, setting her voice low and even. "We have to be quieter than it." Tom drew the rope back slowly, laying it flat so it looked less like a snake and more like a line. Mary lowered the pry bar until the metal lay cool and harmless beside her knee. The shepherd panted in short bursts. Each breath ended in a small choke, the kind that comes when a throat is dry and a heart is tired. His lips still trembled over his teeth. His eyes flicked to every hand, every shadow, and then back to the seam where the girl had been. The toddler slid off the step again and lay on her stomach, head to the gap, careful to stay where boards were solid and her grandmother could touch the back of her dress. She reached into the pocket where she'd kept the little crust. It had broken into 2 smaller pieces now, and butter had left a soft shine on her fingers. She held one piece near the seam and didn't move. "Hi," she whispered. "It's me." The shepherd's ears twitched. The growl faltered, turned to a low hum, then back to silence. He sniffed, a dry, testing breath. The scent of bread traveled the short space between fear and want. Want one, but only by a hair. He stretched his neck, tongue flicking, and touched the edge of the crust. The girl didn't push it closer or pull it away. She let him decide. He took it, teeth careful by some old habit that had not been burned away by bad days. He chewed, swallowed, and rested his chin on the wood as if the act had cost him more than it should. "That's the door," the vet said under her breath. "Let's walk through it." They changed their plan from fast to patient. No more rope yet. No lifting until the dog's eyes were not the shape of alarm. The teenager set his flashlight to a softer glow and laid it on its side so it lit the space like a small moon. Mary slid the blanket forward by inches, stopping each time the shepherd's muscles tightened, starting again only when they loosened. Tom, on his belly, kept talking in that plain voice that sounds like home. "Hey, friend. We're slow. We're steady. No surprises." The girl offered the second piece of bread. The shepherd took it even more gently than the first. His tail didn't move, but his ears tilted toward her and stayed there, as if catching her words the way a sail catches wind. "Good boy," she breathed. Good boy." She didn't clap. She didn't cheer. She made calm into a shape he could rest inside. "Water?" someone whispered. The vet shook her head. "Not yet. Not while he's this scared. We don't want him to choke." She slid a shallow bowl along the plank anyway, leaving it within reach for later. The shepherd's eyes tracked it and then returned to the seam. He was choosing the familiar voice over everything else. "All right," the vet said after a few slow minutes. "Blanket under chest. Gentle." Tom flattened his hands and eased the folded wool across the rough wood. The shepherd's head came up, teeth showing, but the growl didn't catch this time. The girl's whisper kept a thread tied between them. "It's okay." The dog's jaws closed. He exhaled a shaky breath that wasn't quite a sigh. The blanket touched his fur. He didn't flinch. "Now shoulders," Mary said, and they inched the cloth forward until there was enough to grab. "On my count," the vet murmured. "We don't pull. We lift and slide." They set their palms where bone wouldn't bruise, where old scars wouldn't scream. The shepherd's body tensed like a rope pulled taut. "Wait," the vet breathed, reading him the way a person reads weather. They waited. The girl whispered again. "We won't hurt you." The tension faded, not all the way, but enough. 1, 2, 3. They lifted a finger's width and slid a finger's width. The shepherd made that rough sound again and then swallowed it so it wouldn't scare himself. His back leg, freed from the wire but sore and swollen, dragged. He tried to tuck it and winced. The vet slid in a rolled towel to cradle the limb, and his jaw unclenched by a hair. Half his body cleared the edge. Light washed over his face. He blinked hard and nearly bolted backward, panic rising sharp, but Tom's hand on the blanket steadied, not restraining, just holding the world in place. "Eyes on me," the vet said softly, and the dog's eyes found hers for a beat and then jumped to the seam and the small blue dress beyond. 2 anchors, enough to keep him from slipping back into shadow. "Almost there," Mary said, sweat streaking a clean line through the dust on her temple. "Watch the hip." The blanket caught on a splinter. It held. The teenager reached to flick the splinter free, then froze as the shepherd's lips pulled back. "Slow," Tom warned. The boy nodded, swallowed, and tried again with 2 fingers that barely touched the wood. The splinter released. The blanket slid. "Now," the vet whispered, and they gave one more lift, one more careful pull, and the shepherd's chest cleared the frame. For a heartbeat his body seemed to hang between worlds. Then the weight came their way. He bunched his front legs to push, and nothing answered the push the way it should have. No muscle left, no luck. So he gave up the job to the hands that had taken it. They guided him out and down, off the rough edge, onto the waiting grass. He lasted 2 steps on the blanket before his legs folded. It wasn't a fall. It was a surrender. He collapsed into the cradle they had made, breath shuddering, eyes glass-bright but seeing. The circle of people tightened and then loosened again, everyone fighting the urge to crowd. The vet slid close on her knees and set her hand to his chest, feeling the rhythm like a drummer counting time. "Hello," she whispered, as if they hadn't already met in a dozen small ways. "You did it." The town saw him fully now and could not pretend it didn't hurt to look. Thin to the point of wrong. Fur torn and packed with splinters that glittered in the light like cruel confetti. The groove around his ankle red and raw, hair gone to skin. A patch along his side where something hot or harsh had rubbed and rubbed until the body had given up growing hair there. He smelled like old sugar and old grease and fear. He also smelled, faintly, like bread and a child's clean hand. Someone made a sound, a mother's sound that lives between throat and heart when she sees a hurt she cannot fix fast enough. The man with the toolbox took off his cap and held it to his chest. The teenager bit his lip and blinked too fast. Mary let out a breath that sounded like she'd been holding it since the first cry they should have heard days ago. The shepherd turned his head toward the steps. His eyes found the small face he knew now, the one that had spoken through wood and dust in fear. The girl slid from her grandmother's side and came to him with the careful walk of someone carrying water in a full cup. She stopped just short of touching, looked up at the vet, and waited. The vet nodded. "Palm on his shoulder," she said softly. "Let him feel you." The child knelt and laid her small hand on the place the vet showed her, muscle and bone under thin fur, hot with effort. "Hi," she whispered, voice a ribbon in the quiet. "We're here." The shepherd closed his eyes, opened them, and let them soften at the edges. The growl that had lived in his throat all this time went quiet, as if her hand had found the switch. His breath still shook, but less like a shiver and more like a long, late exhale. "Blanket over," the vet said, and someone spread another layer across his back to chase the chill out. Water, just a finger on the tongue. A spoon came, trembling only a little in the hand that carried it. The vet touched the wet edge to his mouth. He licked once, twice. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't dare make the air bigger than it needed to be. But shoulders dropped. Hands unclenched. Something in the circle eased. The grandmother stroked the girl's hair, and the girl kept her hand on the dog and her voice in his ear. "Good boy. You're safe." She said safe like she was learning how the word felt, like she wanted to put it in his fur where he could find it later. The shepherd let his head sink into the fold of the blanket, the way tired bodies sink into sleep. His tail didn't move yet. His paws didn't try. But the hard set of his jaw loosened, and the space between his eyes smoothed. Around him, the town held silence like a bowl so nothing would spill. Above, the broken bulbs knocked each other in a soft clink that sounded, for the first time, not eerie but gentle, like quiet applause. "Let's get him to the clinic," the vet said at last, voice still low. Slow and steady. Tom and Mary and another pair of hands took the corners of the blanket. They lifted with the care people use when carrying something that matters. The shepherd didn't fight. He didn't hide. He let himself be carried. The girl walked beside him, fingers resting on the edge of the blanket, whispering the whole way, the thread that had pulled him from the dark now guiding him into light. They carried the shepherd into the clinic on the blanket like a small boat and set him down on a steel table that was too bright for a body so tired. The vet moved quickly, but not with panic. She spoke in a calm stream, words for the people and hands for the dog. She checked his gums, too pale. She slid her palm along ribs, too sharp. She lifted a hind paw and winced at the raw groove where the wire had bitten deep. There were thin cuts on his legs, old and new, and bruises blooming in dull colors along his hips and side. His coat was packed with dust and tiny splinters that made little stars of pain every time he moved. When she pressed her ear to his chest, she heard a rattle underneath, a tired clatter that told her the air had not been kind to him. Malnourished. Dehydrated, she said, more to herself than to anyone else. She clipped a small patch of fur near his foreleg and found the vein cleanly the way practice teaches. The line went in, taped gentle. Clear fluid began to drip, a slow river of help. She cleaned the wound at his ankle, working around the tender place with gauze that she warmed first in her own hands. She smeared salve where skin had protested too long, then wrapped it soft. For the cuts, she used a wash that smelled like safe things. For the bruises, there was only time and food and rest. She offered a dish of water, but only let him lick the edge. There is a right way to bring water back into a starving, thirsty body. She made notes on a chart without looking away too long. "We'll go slow," she said. "Slow is safe." They moved him from the table to a low kennel with a thick bed and a heater that hummed like a quiet friend. The door stayed open except for a bar at the front so he could see everything, not feel trapped. The oxygen concentrator sat close by, a soft mask ready if his breathing asked for help. The room smelled of clean floors and cotton. It did not smell like fried sugar or boards or fear. He lay on his side and didn't try to sit up. He had done his strong thing already. Now he let the help do its work. The toddler took the stool beside the kennel door and made it her place. She did not bounce or chatter. She folded herself small, with both hands holding the edge of the bar, and watched his chest rise and fall. When his breath stuttered, she whispered, "It's okay." When his eyes rolled toward her and then away, she whispered, "I'm here." Her grandmother tried to lift her once, to take her home for a nap and a change of clothes, but the girl's whole body leaned toward the dog like a plant turning to sun. The vet looked at the child, then at the dog, then nodded. "You can stay," she said. "We'll make a little bed for you two." Word went out on its own. People carried it door to door with their voices and on phones with short, fast calls. By late afternoon, the clinic door opened and closed all the time. A blanket from a house that always smelled like soup. A stack of towels tied with string. A box of biscuits shaped like bones, and a note, "When he's ready." The butcher sent a parcel wrapped in paper and marked for broth. A child brought a rubber ball and set it on the counter, then left without touching it again, as if touching it might hurry things the wrong way. The teenager from the fairground left a flashlight by the door with the batteries removed. "For the next time something needs light," he said, and looked at his shoes. The shepherd slept and woke and slept. His body had learned to keep quiet to survive, and now it had to relearn how to ask. In the evening, the vet warmed a spoon of broth and held it near his mouth. He sniffed first, a dry little gesture with a big meaning. Then his tongue touched the rim, once, twice. The room changed a degree warmer. The little girl's smile climbed without making sound. "Good," the vet said under her breath, like a blessing. "That's the start." Night came kindly. The grandmother sat in a chair, a quilt across her knees. The toddler lay on a folded blanket on the floor, head on a rolled towel, face turned toward the kennel. Every time the shepherd's breath rattled, she made a small sound in her throat that matched it, a human echo of a canine struggle, as if sharing the rhythm could make it easier to keep. Morning made things clearer. The dog's eyes were not so far away. He could follow the vet's hand from left to right. When she spoke, his ears remembered how to aim. She slid the mask over his muzzle for a few minutes at a time to give his lungs a rest, then took it off and let him do the work. She checked the line, checked the wrap at his ankle, checked the cuts, and smiled at the small things. No new bleeding, less heat under the bandage. She did not say he was out of danger. She said, "We're going the right way." The community kept coming, not in crowds now, but in a steady drip of care. A teacher dropped off a stack of picture books and a pack of crayons for the little girl's quiet hours. A carpenter carried in a small wooden ramp, sanded smooth. "For when he tries to stand," he said. The girl reached out and touched the ramp with the same respect she used for the dog. A woman from down the street brought a tin of tea and left it near the sink with a note that read, "For the ones who wait." By the second day, the shepherd could lift his head. It cost him, but he did it, and he kept it up long enough to look at the door, then the little girl, then the door again, making sure the world stayed in the same places. The vet offered a bit of boiled chicken between her fingers. He turned from it, then back, then decided. He took it as politely as he had taken the bread, a gentle mouth meeting a gentle hand. The little girl clapped once before remembering herself, then tucked her hands under her legs to keep them still. "Good boy," she whispered. Good boy." That afternoon, he tried to stand. The first try was only a thought. Muscles twitching, paws flexing, breath holding, then letting go. The second try brought him to his elbow and halfway to his chest. The ramp was there now, a simple path with no tricks. The third try, with the vet's palm at his shoulder and the grandmother holding the bar so it wouldn't rattle, brought him upright for 3 long seconds. He trembled like a young tree in new wind. Then he lay down again, not from failure, but from smartness. It is hard work to come back. Each small victory had a quiet celebration. A lick of water without a cough. A head lift without a wobble. The first time his tail moved, not much, only a small sweep that touched blanket and lifted again. The room stopped as if someone had called, "Freeze," in a game. The vet looked away quick and cleared her throat. The grandmother pressed her fingers to her lips. The little girl didn't hold back. She laughed soft and leaned so her forehead touched the kennel bar. "There it is," she breathed, as if she had been looking for that wag the whole time. The bond between them grew without anyone deciding it. It grew the way ivy takes to brick, slow and sure, until you cannot picture one without the other. When the door opened and footsteps came quick, the shepherd looked, but he did not worry if he heard her voice next. When she left the room to wash her hands, he lifted his head and kept it there until she returned. At night, if she rolled over on her blanket and made a small sound, he made a small sound back. Just enough to say, "I'm here." In the morning, when the vet lifted the bowl, he glanced first at the child, as if food mattered more when she saw him take it. By the end of the week, he could stand for a full minute and take a careful step onto the ramp. The bandage at his ankle stayed clean, the wrap was changed and grew smaller as the swelling left. The bruises faded to old shadows. The cuts closed into thin lines. The splinters came out one by one, each a tiny exit of old pain. The coat that had felt like ash began to feel like fur again, especially where the girl's small brush passed each afternoon, counting strokes without counting numbers. The first walk outside was a short one, a circle on a patch of sun near the back door. The air smelled like grass and soap and the leftovers of rain. He stood in it and closed his eyes, then opened them and found the girl. The leash hung loose, more ribbon than rope. He did not pull. She did not tug. They matched steps, hers small, his careful. He sniffed the wind and decided not to look toward the fairground. Not yet. He looked at her instead. That was enough. People saw them through the window and slowed down without meaning to. Some pressed a hand to the glass and smiled. Some kept walking and smiled later when they were alone, the kind of smile that rises without being called. The town had learned something from the space under the stage and the small seam of light. They started listening in other corners too. A cat cried from a culvert. 2 neighbors lifted the grate. A knock sounded on an old door. Someone answered instead of turning up the radio. The fairground itself grew quieter in the right ways. A volunteer crew swept under the bleachers and along the edges where things get lost. They checked the stage skirting for gaps and patched what needed patching. A sign went up with simple words. "If you hear something, tell someone. In the clinic, all the telling was in looks now. The vet would raise an eyebrow at the grandmother when a new milestone came. The grandmother would squeeze the girl's shoulder without speaking. The dog would lift his paw and set it down where the girl's shoe tip pointed, as if playing a slow, careful game of copy. He wore a soft collar now, a tag waiting for whatever name would be his. He slept with his head near the kennel door, nose out, as close to the little bed on the floor as the bar would allow. One evening, near closing, the girl slid her toy, a small fabric ribbon, through the gap so it lay by his paws. He looked at it, then at her, then set his chin so that the ribbon touched his jaw. The move cost nothing and meant everything. Her eyes shone. "Mine," she said, patting her chest, then pointed at him. "Yours." He blinked slow, and his tail swept the blanket in a quiet yes. It wasn't magic. Some hours were hard. Sometimes he coughed until they put the mask back on. Sometimes he tried to stand too soon and had to lie down with a sound that made the girl's mouth go small. Sometimes the bandage slip needed fixing and he twitched because old hurts remember the road back. But the line of days bent the right way. The vet's chart had more check marks and fewer question marks. The water bowl emptied and always got refilled. The toy moved from by his paw to under it. When the week turned to the next, the shepherd took 3 steps across the clinic floor without help. The little girl matched each one. On the 4th step, his back end wobbled. He stopped, looked at her, and sat down slow. She sat too, the same way, as if sitting could be a shared gift. She put her hand on his shoulder and leaned close. "We did it," she said, and he let out a long breath that sounded almost like a word. Trust did not come in a flood. It came in drops, in small, steady ways. A lick from a tired tongue on a child's knuckle, a head that stayed resting when the vet's hand checked a wound, a nap taken while the world moved instead of only when it slept. Fear shrank. It didn't vanish, but it stepped back far enough that other things could grow in front of it. Things like peace and loyalty and the easy habit of 2 beings who had decided they belonged in the same frame. By the time the ramp felt ordinary and the door to the yard felt like an invitation, everyone in the clinic knew what had happened without needing to say it. A dog that had learned too much about pain had learned something bigger. A child who had heard a sound no one else heard had taught a town how to listen. And in a room that smelled like cotton and warm broth, a bond had settled and made itself at home, quiet, sure, and strong enough to carry them wherever the next steps would lead. The days after the rescue felt like a soft rain after a long, dry spell. People spoke more quietly. They listened more closely. In kitchens and on porches, they told each other the same simple truth. The dog had been crying under the stage while the carnival blared, and they had not heard him. Some remembered a thin sound mixed into song and laughter. Others remembered nothing at all, only the rush of bright lights and cotton candy and games. No one tried to excuse it. They just let the truth sit in the room with them and change the air. At the market on Saturday, life unfolded the way it always had, stalls opening, apples stacked like little suns, bread steaming in paper bags, but a different kind of quiet moved through the crowd. When the little girl in her blue dress came down the lane, the German shepherd walked at her side, steady and sure. He was thinner than he should be but stronger than he had been. His coat had the beginning of shine where a child's brush had passed day after day. A soft leash lay loose in the girl's hand, more ribbon than rope. The dog matched her small steps like it was the easiest thing in the world. People stopped without meaning to. The flower seller reached across her buckets and tucked a marigold behind the child's ear. "For joy that listens," she said, voice catching. The butcher slid a bone wrapped in paper to the edge of his counter. "When he's allowed," he murmured to the grandmother, who nodded and smiled the kind of smile that says both thank you and we will be careful. The teenager who had held the flashlight at the stage kept his hands in his pockets, then took them out to scratch the dog gently under the chin. "Hey, buddy," he said, and his eyes did that quick blink he hoped no one noticed. The dog's tail swept the ground once, then twice. He stood still when children asked to touch him, and he turned his head to watch the little girl each time her laugh lifted. If she paused at a stall to look at jars of jam, he stood behind her like a quiet wall. If a cart rattled too loud nearby, his ears flicked, but his eyes stayed soft because her hand, small and sure, was already on his neck. When she crouched to tie a shoelace she'd learned to loop the week before, he moved one step forward and one step back until he faced the world for her. People watched and felt something knit inside their chests that had been loose for too long. The talk at the market turned toward the fairground. "We should do more than sweep," Mary said, bag of nails at her hip from the hardware store. "We should change the place that hid him." Heads nodded. Tom, who knew how stages sit on soil and how boards grow tired, said, "We can pull the skirting and build it back right." The vet, passing with carrots tucked under her arm, added, "We can make a spot where quiet belongs." The grandmother listened with the soft focus of someone who held the beginning of a story and could see its end taking shape. By afternoon, the fairground filled with a new kind of work. The broken strands of lights came down, and the unbroken bulbs were saved for later. Volunteers lifted old boards that had sagged toward the earth and replaced them with planks that lay straight and true. They swept the space beneath the stage clean, then decided not to close it the way it had been. "We'll leave it open enough to see," Tom said, cutting new skirting with even slats so light could slip through. "No more hiding places that swallow sounds." Children picked up confetti of splinters with gloved hands and dropped them into buckets. A crew rolled fresh paint across railings that had been sticky and dull. The teenager who had blinked too fast at the market strung the unbroken bulbs along the path like stars caught in low branches. The broken bulbs became wind chimes, tied with fishing line and hung at the edge of the field where breeze could make them sing a thin, sweet song. "Let the old noise be music," the flower seller said, pressing sunflowers into soft soil. What used to be an empty space behind the stage turned into a small garden. Not fancy, just honest. Marigolds for courage. Daisies for simple joy. Thyme tucked around the posts because someone's grandmother had said it stood for bravery, and that was good enough. A low bench was set under the shade of the Ferris wheel's long arm, sanded smooth by the carpenter until it welcomed any person who needed to sit. On the back of the bench, a small plaque was fixed with 4 neat screws. The words were plain. "For the voices beneath the noise. We hear you now." People read it and sat, and the river of light and noise from memory slowed in their heads until they could tell one sound from another, the laughter worth keeping and the faint cry that must never be missed again. A water bowl station went up at the edge of the lawn, 2 clean bowls, a spigot, a sign that read, "For thirsty friends." Beside it, a little tin box held spare leashes and a note. "Take one. Bring one back." On the notice board, someone tacked a sheet with the heading "Listening Line" and a phone number that rang 3 volunteers at once. "For when you think you heard something and you're not sure," the vet explained. "Call anyway. We would rather check 10 times than miss once." That evening, as the sun slid behind the Ferris wheel spokes and turned everything warm, the town gathered. No speeches that clapped themselves on the back. Just people standing in a circle small enough to see every face. The little girl stood with her grandmother and the vet, and the German shepherd leaned into her leg, chest deep and quiet against the side of her shin. Tom and Mary held a simple collar between them. The hardware store had cut a round tag that swung from it and clicked softly when Tom's thumb brushed it. "What do we call him?" someone asked, because names matter. People tried a few in the air. "Shadow," said the teenager, glancing at the gaps beneath the stage where darkness had once held the dog. It fit the way a well-worn coat fits. "Echo," said the flower seller, looking at the little girl, because his cry came back to us through her. That fit too, in the way a new coat feels strange for a minute and then becomes the one you reach for every morning. The child looked up at the dog and then at the stage and then at the chimes that tinkled when the wind remembered to pass through. She pressed her lips together in thought, the way she did when she chose the right crayon. "Echo," she said softly. He called and we heard. The dog's ear twitched at the sound of her voice. Tom hooked the collar gently around the shepherd's neck. The tag shone once in the last slice of sun. Echo on one side. On the other, two words that had been a promise since the day under the boards: never alone. The crowd didn't cheer. They breathed. They formed a quiet line to kneel and touch the dog's shoulder or simply to nod as they passed. "Hey, Echo," the butcher said, smiling both shy and proud. "Welcome home." "Hey, Echo," the teenager said, eyes steady now. "See you at the market." The flower seller tucked a sprig of thyme into the little loop on his collar like a medal only he needed to understand. From that day, the fairground wore its new purpose like a good coat. Before any show, volunteers checked the slats below the stage and the corners where things get lost. During every show, a pair of listeners walked the edge. Not security guards, not scolds, just people with open ears whose job was simple: lean down when something sounds small. After every show, kids in bright vests ran a sweep, not for prizes, but for sounds. They found more rappers than cries, and everyone liked it that way. But they kept listening anyway. The pledge the town made didn't live on paper. It lived in the everyday. A soft knock at a window at dusk? Someone answered it. A murmur in an alley? Two neighbors walked there together. A tired voice on the phone that said, "I'm fine," with a crack down the middle? A friend arrived with tea in time. When the carnival returned months later, the music still rose, the lights still spun, the laughter still climbed, but beneath it all, a different rhythm held steady: the habit of listening. Echo walked at the girl's side as if the path had been drawn for the two of them. He learned the garden's edges and circled them without fuss, checking the bench each morning the way Tom checked the stage bolts. He stopped at the water bowls as if to show other dogs what the station was for. He accepted the town without question and guarded the child without drama, placing himself between her and any fast thing, even if that fast thing was only joy running too quick around a corner. Sometimes, when there was no one else in the garden, the girl would sit on the bench and trace the plaque letters with her finger. For the voices beneath the noise, she would read, small and slow. Echo would put his head on her knee and stay, eyes half closed, tail thumping the beat of a life that had learned safety by hearing it named. The wind would move through the chimes and the marigolds, and the old Ferris wheel would keep watch with its quiet circle of shadow. People kept bringing small things, not because Echo needed them, but because giving had become part of how the town talked to itself. A ball appeared on the bench one morning with a note: for later. Bread crusts showed up tucked in napkins, as if 100 children had invented the same ritual on their own. A new tag hung in the hardware store window for a week, plain and blank, until another dog in another part of town needed a name. No one pretended they would never miss a sound again. Life is loud sometimes. But they had traded the old mistake for a new habit. When in doubt, they stopped and listened. They listened at doors and under porches and at the edges of their own hearts. The fairground, once a place where a cry could hide, had turned into a place where a whisper could be heard. At dusk, with the garden glowing and the stage quiet, the grandmother took the child's hand, and the child held Echo's leash, and the three of them walked home on the path that ran along the fence. Behind them, the chimes rang once, like a small bell at the end of a lesson. Ahead of them, porch lights blinked on. The town, softer now and somehow stronger, settled into evening with a promise tucked under its tongue: we will not ignore the faint ones. We will make room for their voices. We will listen even in the loudest places. Echo trotted close, glanced up at the girl, and then forward again. She smiled without looking down, the way you do when you already know who's beside you. And somewhere under the quiet boards of what had become a garden, the old darkness held nothing but cool air, time, and a listening silence that belonged to everyone. Sometimes the faintest cries come from beneath the places we celebrate, reminding us that joy without compassion is empty. The fairground had been full of music, laughter, and light, but in its shadows a voice had been waiting, too weak to rise above the noise, yet strong enough to reach the heart of a child who chose to listen. The German shepherd they named Echo became more than a rescued animal. He was a living reminder that loyalty doesn't vanish, even when the world turns careless. His survival was not only his own. It was proof that second chances are possible, that a cry heard in time can change everything. Every step he took beside the little girl was a lesson the whole town carried. When we choose to listen, even to the smallest voices, we save more than lives. We save pieces of our own humanity. The toddler's innocence did what grown ears had failed to do. She stopped, she leaned close, and she answered. In that simple act, she not only gave safety to one dog but awakened a whole community to compassion. From then on, they listened differently, at doors, in alleys, by rivers, and beneath stages. The moral is clear: never walk past a cry for help, no matter how faint, no matter how far. Because sometimes, hidden in the weakest sound, there is the strongest truth. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who still believes loyalty never fades. Like, comment, and tell us where you're watching from.